They put the cuffs on me right there on the dock, palms cold, the chain clinking, and half the cul-de-sac watching from their porches like it was theater. Someone was live on their phone, someone else shouted, and a woman I'd known since grade school looked at me like I'd turned into a myth she couldn't recognize, which, at that moment, I kind of had. I remember thinking in the stretch between breath and breath that the lake had seen more of my life than any courthouse ever would. My name is Eli Mercer. The house, the dock, the boat, that small crooked bit of the world belonged to my family for 3 generations. I grew up on that dock, learned to bait a hook there, learned the names of the loon calls. That dock was where she tied the ribbon to the old piling the year she beat cancer. That dock is where I buried my hands in the wood when the grief came heavy and low. So when a letter came from the Greywater Community Association saying the dock was unauthorized, I read it 3 times thinking the paper must be wrong. Maybe it was meant for someone else. Maybe the post office messed up, but the name on the certified mail was mine, and the signature was stiff and cold and final. Margot Hale ran the association, a woman with a tidy bun and an even tidier rulebook. She'd moved onto the lake 2 years earlier, bought a house with a view and a hopeful smile, and in less than a season, she'd climbed the ladder to president. To be fair, Margot had charisma. She had plans. She talked about property values like a pastor talks about scripture. But I'd always thought her charm was a front for something else, and then she started changing things. Signs went up, private dock association use only. Notices arrived in neighbors' mailboxes about unregistered structures. The tone went from organized to personal the day she suggested that some old habits were a liability. At the first public meeting, I showed up with my grandfather's deed, the kind of yellowing paper that feels like proof just by how you hold it. Margot brought a glossy packet of survey, supposedly, that showed the dock had been reassigned to common property. She smiled as if she'd just offered me a cup of tea. The room smelled like coffee and nervousness. I remember her voice then, calm and precise. "We have to look after the community as a whole, Mr. Mercer." There it was, the line they use when they want to erase one person to protect 10. That night my neighbors, people I'd borrowed sugar from and mowed lawns with, sat on their porches and said nothing while the association slapped a notice on my front gate. The harassment wasn't dramatic at first. It was slow and surgical. Someone, a contractor with a 2-wide truck and a name that didn't sound local, measured around my boathouse and took pictures. A placard appeared at the shoreline that read, "No private docking." The association froze funds for dock maintenance that had always been shared, a petty bureaucracy strangling a small, essential thing. Then they started sending the guy named Drew, big, loose smile, tattoos like conversations, to check compliance. He threw a shadow I couldn't see past. What people don't always understand about these fights is they're not just about paper. They're about memory and entitlement. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, about a personality who loves wielding power. Margot was a confluence. She wanted control, and, maybe more than that, she wanted to rewrite the story of the lake so she could be the moral author. I started to document everything, because leaving it to chance felt like leaving Anna's name to a rumor. I went down to the county recorder's office, thumbed through brittle files, and found an ancient covenant, lake rights preserved for adjoining property owners, stamped and legal and overlooked. I also found something else in the ledger. A sketch plan of the Marina lease that had quietly expired, leaving the association without the income it used to hide behind. The more I dug, the more I saw that Margot's power was patched together from half-truths and paperwork trimmed just so. That's when the town got interesting. Helen Vasquez, a small, relentless attorney who smelled of lemon and coffee, read the files and smiled with the kind of confidence that makes you feel safe and dangerous at the same time. Robert Kim, who ran the little bank on Main, signed a piece of paper that let us place a bid in the county tax sale on the Marina. Old Mrs. Greer, whose laugh could be heard a block away, brought tea and old stories about when the lake was more boats and fewer lines. We were a ragtag assembly, a builder, a banker, a retired teacher, and me, and somehow the picture we painted was convincing enough to make a judge at least look twice. The auction was the kind of scene that writes itself. A gray morning, a folding table, 12 people from town sitting like jurors, and me feeling like a guy who'd finally learned how to roll dice. The Marina was up for back taxes, the kind of municipal paperwork that occasionally hands a community the chance to correct its own path. I bid, modestly at first. then with a purpose I hadn't expected to have. When the hammer fell and I won, somewhere between my heartbeat and the clerk's statement, I felt something flip, not victory as the movies show it, with champagne and confetti, but victory as a small, quiet writing. Margot's chain of income had a missing link now. She called an emergency injunction. She sent emails with capitalized words like immediate, and she called Drew to ensure compliance. Drew, who already liked the shape of trouble, started showing up with a little more insistence. The confrontation was public and sharp. Margot called a meeting, the kind of all-hands where she'd planned to play the showpiece edited recordings, a barrage of legalese, and an audience hoodwinked by formality. She stood in front of the room like she always did, hair perfect, voice practiced, and accused me of trespass and of stirring unrest. I could have yelled. I could have stormed. Instead, I did what the papers taught me to do. I showed the covenant, the Marina title, Helen's notarized affidavits about the election irregularities that had put Margot in place. I played my own recording, unedited, where Margot's voice suggested she intended to, in her words, reclaim what the community needs, even if some old claims have to be adjusted. The room shifted. You could feel the floor change under Margot. She didn't go without a fight. Margot tried to shout over the facts, tried to make it about me personally, about my moods, about my jaundiced view of progress. The town started to talk in whispers that grew into conversations. Then, in the way these things twist, Margot's supporters peeled away. The election records showed signatures that bent like paper in water, a recycled ballot here, an improperly notarized document there. People started asking the one question that always unpicks power. Who benefits? When you look at the ledger with clear eyes, the benefactor is easier to find. Margot had been redirecting small association fees into a reserve that never had minutes, and reserves without minutes are usually reserves with intent. The day she resigned, the sky was clear and absurdly blue. It felt inappropriate, like the weather was mocking the melodrama. She handed the association over with a courtesy that didn't match the bruises she'd left behind. We formed a new board, people who'd lived at the lake a long time and who knew how to listen. We reopened the marina to the families who had always used it, and we put Anna's ribbon back on the piling because sometimes a small ceremony helps a community remember not to be cruel. There are threads left loose, arguments to be had about how the association runs, meetings to keep open, records to be transparent.